Greetings, welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinar series for the 6th of September. Today's topic is guiding the use of generative artificial intelligence for assessment. This is a joint session with the Assessment and Higher Education Network based in the UK. Fabio, would you like to begin the introductions, please?
Of course. Good morning from Norwich, UK. My name is Fabio Arico, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Assessment in Higher Education Network. And it's been a few years now. We partnered up with the Transforming Assessment Network in Australia, and we are always very happy to join forces to promote diffusion on knowledge and exchange of ideas about anything that relates to assessment. So let me tell you a little bit about us. We are two members of the committee in charge of this connection with the Transforming Assessment. You can find me today here in the room, and you can contact me at the address that you see on the screen. And we also have James Wood from the University of Bangor. So the Assessment in Higher Education Network is an independent network that focuses on everything related to assessment and feedback practices and research. We have our headquarters here in the UK, in England, at the University of Cumbria. But we have an international committee for the conference, and we run this international conference. We are interested in anything that relates to subject disciplines, as well as general education theory and practice, evaluating, researching, developing knowledge and skills, informing policy and practice about everything on assessment and feedback. And we do have a yearly conference. The next conference is going to take place in Manchester in June 2024. And you can easily find us on our website, ahnetwork.org, where you can find all the information about future events, including our partnership events with the Transforming Assessment. So what we like to do is sharing an overview about contributions that are coming or that have already been delivered at our conference, like in this case. And we got two presentations lined up today, and they're all going to be around ChatGPT. So we got Iliada, Eleftheriou, with Ajmal and Mubarik from the University of Manchester, talking about developing a code of conduct for ChatGPT. And this is going to follow by Stuart Hargreaves from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, talking about the experience on law school assessment. And each presentation is going to last between 15 and 20 minutes. If there are burning questions at the end of these presentations, by all means, feel free to ask. But do please engage with the chat, where I or the speaker themselves are going to be able to address your queries. So without further ado, I will leave the virtual floor to Iliada for the first presentation. Iliada, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fabio. Hi, everyone. Morning from the people joining from the UK. Have a nice afternoon. My name is Iliada Eleftheriou. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Manchester in the UK, and I do have a background in computer science, but for the last few years I moved into the area of health informatics. So today I'm going to talk about an AI code of conduct that we created for the University of Manchester and for a particular cohort. So we came up with a set of ground rules so we can enable the incorporation of ChatGPT and any other AI generative tools into the learning journey of the students. But before I start sharing my story, can you see the slides changing?
Yep, slides are working.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Mathew. Thanks, Fabio. So before I start talking, I would like to hear your views about whether you have used any generative AI tools like, for example, ChatGPT or Bard, and whether you have allowed or whether would you allow your students to use it in the assessment process and their learning journey. So if you've got your phones with you, if you can just quickly scan that QR code, I'll put, oh, Mathew and Fabio beat me to it. There is a link in the chat, so you can just click on that link and let me know if you would allow your students, and if you have tried these tools in the past, and whether you think these tools can make the learning journey more efficient. While you're doing this, a very brief introduction to what generative AI tools are. So these are tools that, given any input from the user, they can generate various types of content. For example, text, images, diagrams, or even lines of code or synthetic data sets. They're usually based on large language models that they use machine learning models and techniques that they are based on statistical models, where they try to kind of like come up with patterns within text and learn those connections between words. On the right hand side of this slide, you can see a screenshot of the pile. The pile is a typical big data set that these large language models use to be trained, and you can see examples of these big data sets. For example, the entire Wikipedia, the entire GitHub, Freelo archives, PubMed, and so on. So ChatGPT is an AI generative tool that is based on the GPT 3.5 large language model. We've got GPT-4 that is available, but for a price. It's not yet free. GPT-5 might be released soon, and we've got other tools including Bard from Google, DALL-E that creates images, Claude, Midjourney, and so on. So we've got these tools, but they do have some limitations based on the way that they work. I think one of the biggest limitations of these tools is their accuracy and reliability. We do know by now that they can fabricate facts, they can hallucinate facts. That's because based on the way that they work, they don't really know what's the kind of like the central truth into specific facts. There is also a data cutoff for ChatGPT in September 2021. They can also create fictional sources and bibliography, and they can perpetuate and generate bias within, if we have bias within our data sets, and any society bias that is hidden within our data sets. These tools, they can perpetuate the bias and establish those stereotypes that we have based on the data sets that we provide to these tools so we can train them. They can also favor towards Western perspectives, and that's because they are trained on Western data sets, and they can disseminate misinformation. In terms of challenges to higher education, it's really hard to detect if a student has used a tool to produce an output. These are also non-deterministic models, meaning that if me and Mathew, for example, or Fabio use the exact same input, these tools can produce a different output. So it's really hard to detect whether students or learners or participants, they have used these tools for their outputs, for their assessments. They also follow this, what we call triangle structure. So they an output from these tools always starts with summarizing what the input prompt was, then giving some bullet point list most of the times, and then finally a conclusion that summarizes the output. They usually cover a topic on a very surface, very high level angle. There are also some challenges around accessibility. And then these tools, they do tend to provide general answers rather than focused in-depth coverage of a topic. And also, and very lastly, they're prone to user ability to form an input because the output is directly relevant to the input from the user. This is in the next slide, we're going to see a diagram from OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. And you can see here the accuracy of ChatGPT different models. With the green color, you can see the accuracy of GPT-4, the newest model of OpenAI, and the light blue color is the free version of ChatGPT, which is based on the version 3, GPT-3 model. We've got, so OpenAI evaluated the accuracy of the GPT large language model in, I think, 9 categories, including learning, technology, writing, history, maths, coding, and business. And you can see that the highest accuracy is just kind of like above 80%. And there is a big gap between the free version of ChatGPT and the paid version of ChatGPT. So it's all about understanding why do these tools fabricate facts? Why do they hallucinate facts? And that's because they've got a low accuracy percentage in terms of their training and producing outputs. Another big issue that comes from this big gap between the paid version and the free version is all about the ethical implications of using these tools and embedding these tools in the learning journey of students. So if we do allow these tools, does it mean that students that can pay for the paid version, can they get a higher mark because they get the faster, more advanced model that has a higher accuracy level? But we also have other ethical implications, which is all about, does it mean that, so if a student uses tools, does it mean that they are cheating? Is it going to destroy, so are these tools going to destroy some existing roles in higher education? Can we design AI? Can we identify whether generative AI tools have been used? Do we consider them as plagiarism? There are loads of ethical implications in terms of incorporating these tools in the in higher education and including assessment. So back in January, I was leading a module on artificial intelligence, robot overload, replacement, or colleague. And back then, there were no guidelines, no policies on whether we could use these tools in higher education. But this was a module on AI, so it didn't feel right to tell 100 students, almost 100 students, that they chose this module and they wanted to explore AI, that they are not allowed to use ChatGPT. So what I did instead is I came up with a set of rules, a set of ground rules that students have to follow if they want to use these tools in their learning journey. So in the next slide, we're going to see this set of rules. So so the way that we structure this AI code of conduct, it has 3 tiers. The first tier, it has some principles, some guidelines for when we're using a ChatGPT or any other generative AI tools in our kind of like for individual use. So it's all about recognizing the applications or the tools that they have some AI or some machine learning in the background. It's all around avoiding sharing sensitive information in the input prompts, because any input prompt is being used for training the models. We don't use any output of these tools as advice or guidance or on any legal, health, mental, or financial issues that we might face. We all have to keep up to date. This is a very fast-paced domain, and new tools and models are released almost on a daily basis. Always apply critical thinking, evaluate the accuracy and reliability of the output, and never blindly trust or disseminate an output without verifying, without double checking with trustworthy sources. The second tier of this code of conduct is all about using these tools in the learning and assessment journey. So these are the kind of like the ground rules that I gave to my students when I told them that yes, you can use ChatGPT in the assessments and your learning journey. So the very first rule is Any AI-generated text needs to be in quotes and properly referenced. Any AI output must be evaluated by the students in terms of accuracy, validity, and relevance. So the student needs to highlight any potential bias and errors in the produced output, whether it's text or otherwise, critically evaluate the output and provide the students' own views and thoughts on the matter, acknowledge the use of generated AI tool, even if the output wasn't included in the submission, in the assignment. So this was the kind of like set of ground rules in terms of assessment. We then tested and evaluated this AI code of conduct with the students, and I do have some graphs to show you in the next few slides. And then based on the students' responses, we identified the need of an ethical framework that was going to sit on top of this AI code of conduct, that is not only for only for the learning journey or using these tools in assessment, but for general. So we co-created with the students this ethical framework that that is based on 4 principles: protecting autonomy. So we do want our students, our learners, to be autonomous in terms of their learning and use of these tools, ensuring transparency and use of and explainability of output. So not blindly trusting the output of these tools, fostering responsibility and accountability on the use of the output from these tools, and finally ensuring inclusiveness and equity. So we then had a few tutorial sessions with the students where we gave them working examples of applying these principles and applying this set of ground rules in practice. So this is just one of the, it's just one screenshot of one of the tutorial sessions that we had. And sorry, I just got distracted from the chat. I will reply to all of the questions later on. So here, this is a working example from a solution that incorporates text from ChatGPT, identifies, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, identifies issues and errors with the in the output, it highlights the bias in the data. It tries to understand why does ChatGPT produce that error, that mistake in the output, and then finally in the session we provide our own views, our own critical thinking, own opinions on the exercise. We also had another tutorial session with the students where we highlighted the limitations of these tools and their benefits. So we did that, and then we wanted to evaluate this AI code of conduct. And what we did is we defined 6 dimensions. What are the 6 dimensions that we call that the learning journey of a student is going through? And this is based on whether these tools can make students' research more efficient, their writing more efficient, generation of ideas and arguments, speed of creating an assignment or a submission, the overall quality of a submission, and the general knowledge around a topic. I'm just quickly going to skip through the next few slides. So these are the results. So first we asked the students whether they have used an AI generative tool like ChatGPT at all, and particularly for the assignments. And please note that this data, we gathered this back in March in 2023, before all of the hype around ChatGPT. So 57 out of 90 students, so 88% of our cohort have used AI generative tools, and the majority of them, 52%, they have used them as part of the assessment without us knowing at some point. So back in March, students have been using these tools in in their learning journey, including assessment. In terms of the 6 dimensions that we defined in terms of how efficient these tools can make learning more efficient, you can see here on this graph that the majority of the students, they think that this tool can make the generation of ideas and arguments more efficient. But more or less every single dimension of these 6, the students think that these tools can help every single one of those dimensions, and they can make they can speed up the learning process, they can make the generation of ideas and arguments more efficient, writing more efficient, research more efficient. Then we asked them how useful they found the code of conduct. We did we gathered some responses. I'm going to quickly skip through this. We gathered a few quotes, and we ran some thematic analysis, and based on that thematic analysis, we came up with the ethical framework that I mentioned before. So some results and reflections. So the majority of the students have been using these tools in their learning, including assessment submissions. Workflows and behaviors of students include the use of these tools for generating ideas, researching a topic, summarizing an article, critically evaluating articles, rewording paragraphs that were human written piece of assessments. Also, student awareness of the limitations of these tools has fostered a critical approach to their use. So we've seen that identifying the limitations of these tools and by encouraging transparency and adherence to guidance on plagiarism, and we've seen a bigger awareness of proper research and referencing. So relying more on trustworthy sources like journal papers and articles rather than blindly trusting any outputs that have been produced by these tools. So other guidelines, so the Russell Group, which is based in the UK, recently published some principles on the use of generative AI tools in higher education, and it's all about embracing these tools. So it's all about kind of like supporting the students and staff to become AI literate, appropriately using and effectively using these tools in the learning experience. Also adapting teaching and assessment practices, so we can actually embed these tools in our learning. I do have a few guidelines, some recommendations on how we can do this. So what I would suggest is, first of all, try and explore these tools so we can all better understand their limitations and flaws, because they do have limitations. It's not going to replace these tools they're not going to replace us anytime soon, at least. So also I would suggest to try out assignments and any exam questions as inputs and evaluate the output. Try to see what do these tools do best, but what do they lack? Is it worth reconsidering our marking criteria to maybe refer more to the quality of analysis or depth of coverage of a particular topic, explaining focusing more on explaining the workflows or positioning results in the wider context? Consider running some tutorial sessions with your students to explore these limitations and flaws. And finally, I've got here the link to the AI Code of Conduct. So this is a very long document, and it's also a live document. So I'll copy the link into the chat, and it covers the limitations of these tools. It has the set of ground rules in terms of the 3 tiers, the ethical framework, how do we cite and reference ChatGPT, the use of generative AI tools. It has working examples in there. It has a checklist of guidelines, and finally some guidance for educators. Feel free to use and adapt this code of conduct. And I think that's all from me. Yes, any questions?
Thank you, Iliada. This was perfectly timed in 20 minutes. You got some interesting questions in the chat that I collected, and I'm sure that you're also going to be able to dig out. I'm gonna be able to convey them to you if they're not covered in the second part of the session. I thank you so much for this, and I'm going to move to Stuart's presentation.
Great, thanks everybody. So this presentation is about a project I ran earlier this year. It's in a paper form now, and I'll put a link into the chat box in case you want to download the paper. Now, it is about law school specifically, but I think what you will see, hopefully, as I go through this, is that there are some lessons that are kind of applicable university-wide, higher education-wide, not just for law schools. So here's the general approach that I'll be going through. In particular, I want to highlight the issue of training data. Some of this was covered in the first presentation, but I think what ChatGPT is trained upon helps explain some of the results of this project and is important for us all to consider regardless of the particular department we are in. So in sum, this project put 24 pre-existing exams through the ChatGPT system. Nothing particularly complicated in the way that I did that. I simply asked my colleagues to provide me with previous exams. I put the exams into ChatGPT as it existed in January of this year, sent those, sent the kind of the results back to my colleagues and asked them to evaluate them. So the primary weakness, of course, in that model is that it wasn't blind, right? So my colleagues were clearly aware that they were judging AI-generated outputs for my own benefit, essentially, right, for my own research. So it's possible that they might have skimmed through more quickly than they would have. But nonetheless, I think their judgment is to be trusted. But quite interesting for me was some of the responses I received when I asked them to participate. When they were happy to participate, but many of them said things like, "Oh, I hope the system fails," or "Surely it won't be able to handle my exam." And I thought that was quite interesting because the sense that I got was that they thought I was testing their kind of academic rigor, which of course the project wasn't doing. It was just trying to understand better how generative AI could perform with law exams. So in law school, exams, this isn't just in Hong Kong, but in many common law jurisdictions, exams tend to be high stakes end of term summative assessments. So in the courses, one of the courses that I teach this term, for instance, constitutional law, it's a 3-hour end of term exam worth 100% of the student's marks. So this is somewhat unusual in the field of higher education, but quite common in law. So there's a mixture of in-class exams like that, and then take-home exams that students can have time to do in about 3 or 4 days. And within those exams, we find a mix of essay-style questions and what we call problem-solving or issue-spotting questions, where students are given a particular hypothetical scenario and are supposed to solve it. And what we see is that ChatGPT does quite differently on those two kinds of assessments. So before I give you the results, I want to get back to this issue of training data. So computer scientists basically think, based upon what OpenAI has revealed, that ChatGPT's training data comes from these 4 sources: Common Crawl, Web Text 2, Books 1 and Books 2, and the English language portion of Wikipedia. Some people think ChatGPT has also been trained upon Library Genesis, which is an unauthorized collection of copyrighted text. But you can see from the descriptions on the screen that this is a particularly limited kind. I mean, it's a lot of text, but it's a limited sense of what these systems are learning. And I think, again, will explain some of the results that I saw in this project. In general, then, the data that forms that training base is English language. It's publicly available. And so in the context of this project, because I'm teaching in Hong Kong, much of the material that would have been helpful for the system is behind digital blocks or is also written in Chinese. So in terms of media coverage of legal issues, that's primarily in Chinese rather than English. And I think that will explain some of the disparity. But as Iliada said, the bias in training data is a truly relevant criteria. And it's one that's important for all of us, not just those in law school. Significantly, OpenAI has said it was no longer going to reveal any information about its training data from GPT-4 onwards. It's basically said that our training data is a kind of trade secret. And so this means that the black box is going to be blacker than ever, right? We're really going to have no idea what these systems are trained upon. We're just going to have to trust in the outputs. And so when we think about what we expect students to do with these outputs, I think this is something that we always need to bear in mind. All right, so on to the results of the project then. So overall, the system failed on the majority of the exams. There were some that reached as high as an A grade, but the majority did fail. It's important to notice, though, that this is very much a baseline project, right? I put no effort essentially into crafting detailed prompts. You know, a law student or a university student of any kind of ability probably would learn to craft better prompts to get the kind of response it wanted. I didn't edit any of the answers before sending them to my colleagues for evaluation, and I was using what is already now essentially an outdated version of ChatGPT. But even with those limitations, the feedback that I received from colleagues was they were surprised essentially how well it did. So if you have not yet had the chance to put your own assessments through ChatGPT, I would, or another version of a generative AI system, I would encourage you to do that, because I think seeing what it can do in practice in your own area, in your own field, is really instructive. All right, so the four categories help us understand, I think, the strengths and weaknesses of ChatGPT and generative AI generally. So the strongest answers, and these are the ones that reached into the A-level grades, were exams that were exclusively essay-based and required students to reflect or analyze relatively broad topics that were not connected to sort of hyper-local legal issues and didn't require students to apply any kind of specific technique they had been taught in their classes. Excuse me. The really good answers, B's and B pluses, interestingly, were actually about Chinese legal issues. And though they were not, as I said, although Chinese legal issues are not well represented in the training data, these exams were essay-based. And so basically the system was able to rely upon enough general information to receive a B grade or a B plus in certain instances. Importantly, and compared to the grades that we see in the next slide, these exams didn't ask students to clearly provide an evaluative judgment, what is the likelihood of some event happening, or a particular recommendation, right? So asking for specific legal advice. Again, they were quite general in nature. So the poor answers moving towards fails, but still passing grades. These exams started to move away from essay questions and required students to apply local legal knowledge to a particular legal hypothetical scenario that had been invented by the professor in question. So what we saw here was that ChatGPT was completely unable to make accurate references to local law or cases, so again reflecting the weakness in its training data, and often invented the latter, right? So rather than say, I don't have access to this information or I'm unaware of this information, instead it hallucinated cases, which did have plausible names and citations. So again, some of these actually slipped past my colleagues who hadn't recognized that the system had invented an entirely fake case in answering the question. The reason it was still able to pass was because the courses that these exams were for were related to common law issues, essentially, right? So Hong Kong implements the common law. So in certain instances, the Hong Kong version of the common law is quite different than it is in, say, England. But in other instances, it's really quite similar. So where it's similar, then the system was able to perform much better than when it had to deal with hyper-local legal issues. One exception to this was a course on international business transactions, which had nothing to do with local Hong Kong law. But in this case, the system did poorly because the instructor, the professor, had required students to use a specific stylistic form that he had taught in the class. And of course, ChatGPT didn't know what that was, essentially. The bulk of the answers, though, again, were failing answers. The conventional kind of law assessment where students are required to read a long hypothetical scenario and apply specific legal instruments drawn from that course, local legal instruments, and come to a evaluative conclusion, the system had a very hard time dealing with this style. And because this is the majority of law assessments, this is why ChatGPT ultimately failed the majority of exams we put through it. All right, so conclusions that we can draw, and I think this is where it's useful for everybody in the room, regardless of whether or not you are in law or not. ChatGPT appears to do, at least in its current form, does best with relatively short questions, so short prompts to the students that require them to write a general kind of essay, reflecting, considering, analyzing some topic of a limited nature, right, of about under 2,000 words, about a topic that is international or non-local in the case of Hong Kong, but largely a Western topic would be well answered by ChatGPT. Questions that don't require normative value judgments or predictions of outcomes, it does better with. And as the first presentation mentioned, the cutoff date, so September 2021, if you ask it questions about after events that happened after September 21, at the moment, it cannot answer those kinds of questions. So if you're seeking out, as an assessor, if you're seeking out relatively AI-proof questions, then for the time being, it's going to be the opposite of these points on the screen. So what lessons can we draw from this then? So I think the most seductive aspect for students, and really for all users, is that when you give ChatGPT a prompt, it gives you an answer immediately. It begins to flow down the screen right away. And it appears like it knows what it's talking about. It appears as though it's performing a critical kind of analysis. And unless you are a subject matter expert in that area, it can be very difficult to tell if it is accurate or not. And so this is really quite dangerous for students, because it's very hard for them as learners, if it's their first exposure to a particular field, it's very hard for them to judge accurately, is what ChatGPT is providing me, is that accurate or not? Because ChatGPT itself doesn't hedge its bets, right? It doesn't say, I'm 90% sure about this, or I'm 10% sure about this. The second lesson I've already mentioned, it's bound by its training data. And I think that means we have to give real consideration, as I've already said, to what that training data is, because ultimately that's going to greatly impact upon what comes out of the system. The third lesson, again, I've also mentioned, this is only a baseline. So for all the flaws that ChatGPT has at the moment, and as I said, it failed most of these exams, it is going to get better, and already has. After the project had, excuse me, after the project had concluded, I put 2 of the failing exams through ChatGPT 4, sent them back to the same assessors for reevaluation, and 2 of those 3 now received a passing grade. So in another year, in 2 years, in 5 years, these systems are only going to improve. Now, obviously, what's important for one of the things that's important for higher education is the issue of academic integrity. And we know that in reality, despite what companies like Pearson or Turnitin might say, it's very difficult to catch students using generative AI using another algorithm, right? At best, you're going to have a prediction. And I think it's very unlikely that we would impose academic penalties based upon a prediction or a guess, an algorithmic probability. It's not like detecting conventional sources of plagiarism. With that said, at the moment, those hallucinated sources that I mentioned do offer an obvious method. So if you come across those, I think it's worth looking up sources that your students refer to and checking to see if they are in fact real. But at the same time, I don't think we should let fears about academic integrity guide our assessment choices, right? In the same way that the issue of contract cheating has been a long-term issue, but we still believe, or at least I think many of us still believe, in the importance of long-form writing, even though allowing long-form writing, long-form research papers increases the chances that somebody might use a contract hire to do it. We still allow that because we recognize the pedagogical benefits of it. So in my view, AI is going to be an inevitable part of all kinds of knowledge work, right? Not just law, but all kinds of knowledge work in the future. And so really we need to be thinking about how can we both maintain academic integrity and equip students with the appropriate skills. So there are, I think, 3 possible options, 3 broad options, ways to think about it. So one is obviously to limit or avoid or discourage the use of AI. And the easiest way to do this, of course, is to return to or mandate in-class assessments. And my fear or my suspicion is that many institutions will choose that option because it very much is the easiest option, right? If you know that the student's in class, it really makes it very difficult for them to rely upon AI in the assessment. In the case of certain departments, so law is one, Clinical education is an option as well, and clinical education has much to recommend it beyond this reason. But of course, this doesn't work in every department. But anyway, the advantage of these options is clearly that they would maintain academic integrity. But on the other hand, it's not actually going to teach our students the AI skills that, as I've said, I think are going to be important for many careers. So the second option then is for us to more actively embrace AI as a learning tool, and there's different ways that we can think about it. I polled my own students last year, just informally, to say, how have you been using AI, generative AI, in your studies? And bearing in mind the context is, again, that I'm in Hong Kong and we have many students operating in a second or third language here. Many of them had used it to improve the quality of their writing, to proofread essentially, to improve the grammar, improve the spelling, to use it as a writing aid in that way. But others had used it also to help with outlining. As an academic, I've actually used it to help me fix footnotes, to convert footnotes and citations from one format to another. If you've not tried that, I recommend it. It's a great time saver. Other things that we can think about doing is to provide students with written text that is generated by an AI and say, okay, here's what the AI has. How are you going to improve upon it? And if you have students using Google Docs or things like that, then the version history is useful there, because you can see what they start with and see where they end up. Another thing to think about is to think beyond ChatGPT, that there are multiple AIs out there, as Iliada explained. And so you can have students compare the answers that they get from different multiple AIs and have them try and explain which one is best or which one is accurate. What are the errors in one? What explains the discrepancies, right? And having them actively think about issues about bias within data or coding and so on. So I think these kinds of options are useful in terms of equipping students with AI skills. But I mean, the reality is there's still the risk that these tools could be inappropriately used in submitted work. The final option is what I kind of call the anything goes option, which is basically just to say, AI is a tool. There's no such thing as inappropriate use. You just go and use it as you see fit. And instead of grading students upon kind of criterion-based referencing, we go back to the old-fashioned strict grade curve, which says you're just going to be ranked compared to your peers. The theory being, if you can't do better than the AI, or you can't do better than your peer using the AI, how do you hope to get a job? In reality, I think probably we can try and combine some of these options. Using in-class assessments for final exams, for instance, but teaching usage skills along the way, or for smaller assignments, allowing it in assessments at waypoints for formative assessing. But it's also important to think that I don't think we should try and have a universal higher education approach to this. I think figuring out what works and what doesn't is going to be not just department specific, but also course specific, and it's going to require trial and error, right? And also tools beyond ChatGPT. So, for instance, this term, I just actually did this just yesterday. The term started here yesterday. So I'm teaching the course, as I said, is a 100% final exam. So I'm not worried about it in terms of students using assessment or using AI in terms of assessment, but I wanted to try and use it in my own pedagogy, essentially. And so I have some software called Otter AI that allows me to transcribe my lectures and summarize them. And then I'll provide the summaries to the students, and then I will survey them later this term and see if that is useful to them or not. But again, I think it's up to us to try and figure out how to experiment with these tools and understand what works and what doesn't. All right, so I have three final considerations before I close. One is the possibility of regulatory issues. Now, this is more of an issue probably in professional degree programs. So, for instance, in law here, the relevant professional body mandates that our courses for core common law courses essentially are assessed by way of a final exam worth a significant amount. I think it has to be at least 80%. And so in our context, it makes assessing AI skills challenging in courses, right? We can kind of teach them in a sense, or we can recommend students use them, but it's quite difficult to assess them in a common law course. Or we can hive them off into legal research and writing courses, but students tend not to treat those the same way they teach other courses. So that's an issue that we face in law, at least. The second is a real need for institutional support, right? So we have kinds of webinars like this, we have conferences. I'm sure at all your institutions, Senior administrative people talk about the importance of generative AI and how it's the future and all these things. But if we're expected as academics to incorporate it into our pedagogy, into our assessments, then this is going to require a lot of institutional support. Even though, as I've said, it's great if we experiment ourselves, we're still going to need support in the way of time, teaching assistants, training for people that are completely new to this, and also I think acceptance of failed efforts, right? If we want colleagues to try and use generative AI in particular ways and it doesn't work, we should understand that and provide kind of a safety net effectively in terms of annual reviews and promotions that these ideas might not always work. The final concern revolves around equity. So this is a real issue in Hong Kong still, because ChatGPT is still not actually available. You have to use a VPN and you have to have an overseas phone number just to access ChatGPT 3.5. So this month, actually, some of the universities here have come to an agreement with OpenAI and Microsoft to provide students with institutional access to ChatGPT 3.5 and DALL-E, which is one of the graphical generation ones. But it's relatively limited in terms of how many questions they can ask and how much output they can have. And it doesn't include ChatGPT 4, which, as Iliada said, as many of you may know, is a paid version that provides superior results. So if we're expecting students to use these tools, if we think that they really are going to be part of core education and their future, or the skills that they need for their future, then I think it's incumbent upon us, or really the institutions, to ensure that they do all have equal access to those tools. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was very comprehensive. Let me thank in a particular way today's speakers, like Iliada has come out from her leave to be with us. Stuart's got quite a lot of commitments and managed to squeeze us in as well. So I'm really, really thankful for the extra effort to be with us. I'd be curious, Iliada, to hear what was the response to your mentee questions and what you think about those. But while Stuart is on the microphone, we had a question from Lotte about what you define by in-class assessment. And she said, our students bring their PC to class and use Wi-Fi and internet access. So are you meaning that you are actually precluding every access to the internet at all?
Yeah, so the way that in-class assessments work here is students can opt either to handwrite exams or perform e-exams or electronic exams. In e-exams, they bring in their own laptops, but those laptops are locked down using a special software called, I think it's called Exam 4, but there's another competitor called Exam Soft. There's a couple of services like this, and basically that locks down their laptop for the duration of the exam. It allows them to submit the answer over Wi-Fi, but all they have is basically a text box on their screen, no spell check, no internet, no access to other files. So it's really no different than handwriting, but they can type. So that's what in-class assessments are for us.
Iliada, did you have any insights about your survey?
Yes, absolutely. So we had 48 responses. 36 people have tried AI gen tools before. In terms of allowing students to use AI gen tools, 30 people out of 48 said yes. Only 2 said no, and 16 said maybe. In terms of the impact of AI gen tools in the learning journey of students, the majority of responders said that the AI gen tools can make students' research more efficient, than generation of ideas and arguments, than students' writing more efficient, then finally overall making speed up students' overall learning process, increasing the overall quality of students' assignment, and increasing student knowledge. All responses have been above average, so tending towards strongly agree that these tools can make the learning journey more efficient.
So
yes, I can share. Sorry, go on.
Go on, please.
Someone asked if we can have the stats in the chat. Can I share screenshots in the chat?
Yeah, maybe we can attach your results to the slides when we disseminate them.
Yes, happy to do that.
That'd be nice. I think Lee has posed quite an interesting question when she says, what do we mean by AI proof? Is there a definition of AI proof, and it should be really something that we should aim at as well? And I think that is a very good question for both the presenters to address. Iliada, would you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Right. I think I think what I would say is we don't even have a specific definition for AI. So AI can mean different things. So this is a very tricky question to answer, to be honest. So it's all about, what do we mean by proofing our assessment for AI? Does it mean that well, I guess the question would be, do we really want to go back to exam-based, memory-based assessing memory of our students, or do we really, or do we want to assess critical thinking, problem-solving skills? It depends on the domain. It depends on the area. I can't really say for sure if we can reach that AI proof way for our assessments. Stuart, I don't know if you have any other views on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's very contextual, right? So it depends upon what you are trying to assess. So, for instance, again, just to bring it back to my own department, if in one course we are trying to assess critical thinking in a research paper, then there's going to be no issue, presumably, or I would have no issue with students using AI to fix their writing, to catch mistakes, to improve it. I think that's fine. But if the course was a writing course, a legal research and writing course, then maybe you would say, well, actually using those tools right away prevents the students from actually learning how to improve their writing themselves. So I think, as Iliada just said, I think it depends upon what you are trying to assess. And then AI proof, there's not going to be such a thing as entirely AI proof, but I think the implication of AI proof means it's relatively challenging for students to avoid or to fake the assessment by using AI tools. But that will be contextual on what is the thing you're trying to assess.
There was an interesting question by Jane, and that was still on Iliada's presentation, but once again, I think it applies to both the presenters. And Jane was asking, what do you mean by students remaining autonomous using AI tools? So, yeah, well, to which extent can we talk about students' autonomy with respect to artificial intelligence?
So we don't really want AI generative tools to replace students' critical thinking or the ability to form opinions or views. We don't want these tools to replace problem-solving skills of our students or the next generation of workforce. So that's what we mean by autonomous. We do want students to be autonomous in terms of forming their own opinions, being able to come up with by critically evaluating an article from the web. I think the key here is to use these models as a tool, as a cognitive partner, as Tom, I think, mentioned in the chat. So it's all about finding that, using it as a colleague rather than replacing our own way of forming an argument or coming up with a solution to a problem.
And Stuart, of course, you can answer the same question, but I think Mike had a provocation specific to the discipline, and he was saying, will AI do better than a judge in a law court in the future?
I mean, I guess it depends on the judge, right? But no, I mean, when it comes to those matters, I mean, I expect at some point judges will use these tools to help them summarize areas of law when the tools improve. At the moment, the tools are nowhere near good enough to allow lawyers or judges to rely on them to help them understand the law, right? The tools are good enough for lawyers now to help them summarize documents. Lawyers have been using AI-assisted document review tools for years. That's not a new thing. But I think anytime there's going to be a decision about human behavior and human values, right, which courts are ultimately going to deal with, putting somebody in jail, for instance, or awarding custody of a child to somebody, I have a very hard time imagining that any system would take people out of the loop or would allow algorithms to make those decisions. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that would be one of the final things to, if ever, to be replaced by an algorithm. I just think humanity would have a hard time accepting that.
Another interesting question from Ellen. This was, again, on Iliada's presentation, but it'd be interesting to hear what Stuart says as well. Were the students' perception of AI use reflected in their work? Or in other words, did it help improving their work to a certain extent?
Sorry, go on.
Sorry. So I had students in a research paper course on privacy law last year use ChatGPT to help them come up with outlines for their research paper. And then I asked them at the end, I said, how much of that outline did you use? And the majority of the students said, actually, the outline that it created wasn't very good. It was very general. It gave me a couple of ideas, but it certainly wasn't a substitute for me thinking about how I wanted to design my research paper myself, right? So I think, again, limited experience, but the primary use here has been fixing up writing, just improving the quality of written outputs, rather than replacing the idea generation. It's just a mechanical proofreading tool for most of the students.
Very final comment from you, Iliada?
Yes, so I think it's all about so by exposing our students to these tools and by understanding the limitations and flaws, then I think we take that scariness away, because back in January, when I first had to kind of like deal or explore these tools, I was very scared that these tools they're going to replace us at some point. But by kind of like understanding what's happening behind the scenes, understanding how they work, trying to identify their limitations, their flaws, understanding that they can only create an essay, but it only covers high-level surface depth research points that we want to see in our assessments is a kind of like, it's all about exploring, using these tools, understanding their limitations, and knowing the opportunities and the benefits of the areas where to apply them. Some areas we can apply them and use them very well. So, for example, writing up emails, or I think Stuart mentioned footnotes before. Some other areas, they are not that great.
Thank you so much. And it's 9 o'clock, and I'm aware and conscious that colleagues need to run to other meetings, including our presenters. So I cannot thank you enough, and all the participants, for another very interesting session. I learned a lot myself. And it's goodbye to me, and I'm going to give it to Mathew for final greetings.
Thanks, folks. Just want to go to the final slide and remind you that on the 4th of October, we have our next session coming up, and that will be looking at assessment and feedback literacy, and that as it applies to staff and students. So thanks very much for joining, folks. The recording will be published very shortly. And if Iliada, if you can send me a link or a PDF containing the results of the survey, I will stick that onto the recording page as well. So thank you very much, folks, and see you again next month.